Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the new home of power mining analysis. In today's episode, Anthony Power and I are going to be attempting to answer the question, can the Bitcoin mining rally continue, specifically in relation to the Bitcoin mining stocks we cover regularly on the channel. There's a ton to unpack in today's presentation, including the bull and bear case for the price of Bitcoin. Before we get into all that though, please take a second, smash the like button guys, huge help to myself and the channel. Anthony loves it. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join. Our goal is 45,000 subscribers by the time we get to Nashville for the big Bitcoin conference. We're well on our way. We'd love to have you as part of the community. Now, with that being said, you guys leave a comment in the section below. Let us know if you're currently holding any of the miners discussed, your outlook on the sector overall, and your price target on Bitcoin for the back half of the year. Now, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's video, we've got Anthony Power back in the house here. We're going to be trying to answer the question, can this Bitcoin or Bitcoin miner stock rally continue? Anthony, it's starting to feel like we take one step forward and two steps back in this space. If you look at the price of Bitcoin, we're about 10 to 15% off the highs that we saw earlier in the year. There was a lot of anticipation at this point, post ETF. We would really start to see some big action in the price of Bitcoin, but it seems continued selling pressure, FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt is really causing havoc with the price of Bitcoin here, eh?
Probably closer to 20-25% from the highs back in March. But it's touched 70,000 a couple of times. It's hovering, I don't know, 58, 59 today. I don't know what it is about, Europe and Asia seem to bring the price of Bitcoin up, but as soon as the US market opens, it seems to sort of tumble down a bit. So there seems to be a feature with regularity, but it's just Bitcoin's just doing what Bitcoin does. It's volatile. I actually caught a chart this morning, Freedom by 40, we had on the show last week, and he did a great live show with us. Brought all his charts along, and we'll get him on next time because we've now worked out how he can sort of manage his charts going forward. So, but he had a chart for Bitcoin, and the signal on his chart was suggesting six figures in the not too distant future. So that to me gives me some sort of hope there. I mean, and if we look at previous cycles, the Bitcoin price tends to rally maybe 2-3 months after the halving, and we're getting to that sort of stage now. So it seems to have hit a low point in the 50s, this week, and now we're seeing sort of like a slow but short upward climb. As I say, it hit 59, nearly 59,500 very early this morning UK time, but the American market's opened and it dropped back down to 57, but it's hovering around that point there. And the Bitcoin miners, to be honest with you, haven't really, not in normal years, they would have been really volatile. They'd have been dropping far more than the Bitcoin price. But actually, we're seeing a bit of green today in the Bitcoin miners. I think most of them were green. They were certainly green at the market opening on the US markets. Then they dropped down, but some of them are recovered now. And we've seen the likes of Bit Digital up about 7 or 8%, and Wolf was up quite a good number as well. So there's some, it's not totally correlated at the moment with the Bitcoin price, and that's, interestingly, those two companies there have announced or actually providing, one's providing a large HPC contract, the other one's announced the provision of getting into the HPC space. So that news is still out there, and it's still affecting, in a positive way, some of these mining companies.
Yeah, it seems like the HPC frenzy here has really given new energy or new life to the sector. It almost feels like all the Bitcoin mining, the HODL, the exahash has been taken out or priced out of these stocks. And now any strength in Bitcoin, we see these large jumps, which is honestly a pretty nice spot to be in if you're holding a good portion of the miners. Now, Anthony, earlier in the year, when the Bitcoin ETFs got approved, we saw massive selling pressure out of Grayscale or GBTC. That has now subsided. Obviously, there was a lot of ETF inflows during that time as well, but we're now facing some new selling pressure with Mt. Gox settling all of their accounts payable. And we've got the German government here, or at least a state within Germany, continuing to sell a good chunk, around 50,000 Bitcoin. So Sam Tabar actually put out a tweet saying it's not the German government itself, it's a single state within Germany. They confiscated this Bitcoin as part of the standard process for any confiscated digital assets. They're now selling these off, obviously to finance local authorities or municipalities. But Anthony, the chart on the screen here, it shows the selling started really kind of in the middle of June. And we're now down to about 1 or 2 days worth of selling pressure, depending how they play this out. So the German state selling seems to have subsided. Mt. Gox has seemed to slow down. We've got ETFs continuing to show huge inflows. The slide here shows BlackRock has now surpassed $18 billion of inflows into their ETF alone. So Anthony, continuing to see this battle between buyers and sellers, who do you think is ultimately going to win here?
Oh, there's enough buyers for these Bitcoin being sold. People will be rubbing their hands together, getting the Bitcoin price where it is at the moment, because it's you try not to think of Bitcoin at today's price. You try to think of it where it's going to be, in a year's time, 5 years time, 10 years time. And as we've seen in the last 11, 12 years, when Bitcoin was, lower than $1 per Bitcoin, and there was people out there saying buy Bitcoin, and not many people were doing it. And the brave who did are the ones that are benefiting now. And we've just seen that trajectory continue. Yes, it has its cycles where you have a bear cycle, and we saw in 2022 how it affected the miners, and it shook out a lot of maybe people who'd been mining in their own sort of like garages and such like that. So really now, in terms of Bitcoin mining, unless you can mine with literally free energy, it's really the big companies that are mining Bitcoin now. They've sort of taken over the mantle, and the great majority of mining in the world we've seen in North America. It's since the ban in China, and we believe it's not totally banned in China. There's probably still mining going ahead there, but nothing like what's happening in North America. Some of these mining companies from China came to North America. So Bit Digital themselves were Chinese miner. They came across before the ban and set up in the US. Whether they could see in advance what was likely to happen, but North America now 34% of the world's Bitcoin mining there, and growing, because these miners have got some massive hash rate numbers to achieve in the next 18 months. That we talk about sort of like the big five who are aiming to be over 20 exahash, and some of them are looking to get to 100 exahash. So that size of the market will predominantly be in North America, and we're seeing the difficulty occur now because that hash price got down to 43 last week. It's risen a little bit there, probably 48, 49 dollars per petahash per day. And so at them sort of levels, it's really challenging for even some of the non-public miners to make a profit, unless they've got access to the power in terms of the rates that Cypher or TeraWulf or Riot or Soluna are achieving. Anything that's sort of round about the 3 cents or under mark, that's where you want to be, because even with TeraWulf's 3.5 cents, they put on their update how much they were spending in energy on each of their Bitcoin. I think it was like 35,000 per Bitcoin. That's a big chunk. Bitcoin price is 58,000, and 35,000 if it's going on energy. You've got 24,000 to meet all the other costs, all the facility costs, your staffing costs, your G&A costs. It doesn't go far. And no. So, if you've got a price at 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour, what does that do to the energy to mine a Bitcoin? That could take you to sort of 40,000, 45,000. Then you've only got 8,000 for you. So there's not a lot to play in. Some of these miners are really efficient. They've got low energy prices, so they're able to manage longer than most. And I expect the last people to switch off will be some of these big miners with a low power cost and really low efficiency. Yeah. Or good, high efficiency in terms of a low number. So anything around, I think CleanSpark setting at the moment with just over 22 joules per terahash for their fleet, which is, when you see the size of the fleet, that's a really good number. But anything around 22, 23, 24 is at the top end of the industry at the moment. And bear in mind, in a year's time, we'll be talking, in the teens. We'll be talking
And
16,
yeah.
17, 18. When these new S21s, when the new block machines get installed, when Bitdeer install their seal miners with a really low efficiency, these numbers will come down significantly, and that means then you're reducing your biggest cost. The biggest cost is energy, so you want to reduce that as much as possible.
Well, and second to that is CapEx, right? And you've also got to factor in the depreciation schedule into that 24,000 or 10,000 or whatever's left on the table. So you're right, Anthony. Margin's getting pretty thin at this point. The other thing to factor in here, you guys, as you alluded to, Anthony, it's very difficult to get these PPAs and power purchase agreements for these rates, even as a multi-billion-dollar multinational publicly listed company. So you can imagine how difficult it would be for individual hobbyists or home miners to get access to this power. As we just talked about in yesterday's podcast, I looked on my invoice. My power rate is 10.5 cents, and you're north of 30, Anthony. So just impossible to make money at these hash prices in terms of individual mining around the world. Now, the other bullish factor we're seeing here is continued adoption from corporations. So I've seen a number of tweets talking about blue chip companies adding Bitcoin onto their balance sheet. We'll start to see that come out in Q3 filings. The other one here is investment banks. So Mike Alfred posted talking about Bernstein initiating coverage on IREN with a buy rating, $26 target, and Core Scientific, a $17 target. He jokes better late than never to the party, but the interesting thing here, Anthony, is a lot of these investment banks were polarized on the other side of Bitcoin not too long ago. We've seen the ETF adoption. We've seen the demand, the hunger for Bitcoin exposure from the general public. And it seems the investment banks are just piling in full force now.
Yeah, they are, and you've mentioned the two there. Both got significant resources going into HPC, so maybe that's probably a factor because that is the conversation at the moment. We're not saying it's there forever, but the conversation that's being had at the moment with Wall Street is about high performance computing, not necessarily about Bitcoin mining. And this is today's conversation. The conversation in 6 months' time or a year's time could be back to Bitcoin mining. When we see the price, we talked about this on the last two podcasts, price gets 120, 150,000, the conversation turns. But what Wall Street like about the HPC is the predictability of the revenues and the profits. And it literally is, you can literally get it down to a fine tooth comb and Core Scientific and the likes of Bit Digital in their latest their last quarterly earnings update, 61% margins on the HPC, nowhere near like that on no miners achieving anywhere near that on Bitcoin mining.
Well, and Anthony, just to throw in there on Core Scientific, they just came out with that huge news yesterday with Block about the 3 nanometer chips, 15 exahash worth of chips ordered, and really no word or noise or movement in the share price at all in reaction to that. So you can see how much these analysts value the HPC developments versus the Bitcoin mining, hey?
Yeah, and we're the uncertainty is I don't know how much she's got. Some of that number is going to be replacing some of their older machines because Core Scientific they have one of the biggest fleets of miner machines. I mean, they did mine the most Bitcoin in the last 3 years and in Q1, so they've got a massive fleet, and some of it's aging. Adam's been able to utilize some of that older fleet at lower power rates and actually benefited from it and actually been getting profits out of some of the older machines. But I think from a long-term aspiration, all these miners want to replace machines. And one company that's been doing that in the last sort of year without growing their hash rate is Hive Digital. They've been replacing their fleet in and not necessarily growing it as shareholders would have expected. So it's all right saying you're at a certain exahash and you want to grow. These machines don't last forever. You have to replace them, and every 3-4 years, it's you've got to have the capital to do that. And so Hive haven't gone out there and borrowed and raised funds through an ATM. They've done everything sort of through cash flow and trying to keep a strong balance sheet that way. I mean, they've got to 5 exahash, but it's an efficient 5 exahash, and they've got more S21s coming in the next few weeks to improve that efficiency. It's all about get the efficiency down. It helps then when you've not got the lowest energy level because your machines don't need as much power to mine Bitcoin. So, if you've got the cheapest power and the best efficiency, you're on a win-win. But not everyone's got, only a few of these miners have got the really cheap deals. And the really cheap deals are not as cheap as they were previously. So TeraWulf were, they were getting real benefit from the nuclear site and also from Lake Mariner. But we've seen the market prices for energy start to rise a little bit, and quite a few miners are on market rate. So you have to pay the rate at the time. So they look at a blended rate of about 3.5, which means that their market rate there is probably over 4 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, and I thought a really interesting comment from the live stream yesterday, Anthony, was just the amount of concentration now in Texas, West Texas. If something were to happen to that grid, whether it's a terrorist attack or a natural disaster or a fire or whatever the case is, there could be some serious disruption in not only power pricing, but in Bitcoin mining, HPC, and I guess availability of infrastructure down there. So that's an interesting dynamic to watch. Anthony, you're right, though, in saying that adoption is becoming more and more widespread. And interestingly enough, we actually called this on yesterday's podcast as well. A new guest speaker will be joining us in Nashville, Bitcoin. Anthony, Mr. Donald Trump. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of meeting him before, but he is now a big advocate of Bitcoin, saying that all Bitcoin should be based in the USA, all future Bitcoin should be mined here. Seems to be very bullish for the industry. And he's now putting his stamp of approval on there by delivering a keynote speech in Nashville at the world's biggest Bitcoin conference, which we happen to be going to, Anthony. How are you feeling about this one?
Yeah, I mean it's going to be great to be part of that conference and maybe get the chance to listen to what he says. I know he's on day 3, so but it was inevitable when they sort of like were putting out on social media the amount of Americans that were actually had an interest in cryptocurrency, and the number was staggering. It was something like 40 million. That's a big, and bear in mind this will be adults. That's a big voting package there, and you want to make sure that you're not if you're going to go against crypto in the way that the Democrats have in terms of trying to really make it challenging to with all the sort of the red tape and everything like that, and not really support what Bitcoin's about. And then you've got somebody that comes in and realizes this is probably a good way to support it, get the vote that way. Then it's a good statement. We're now hearing that the Democrats are sort of like they're interested in Bitcoin all of a sudden, but when you've got 40, 50 million people who are voters, you want to make sure they're all on side.
Well, and you talk about asymmetric risk reward in investing. I just don't see any upside potential in dismissing crypto or Bitcoin at this point in adoption cycle. So it'll be interesting to see. I understand RFK Jr. is also going to be at the event. So a number of key contenders or candidates in the November election, making Bitcoin really a hotbed topic for this year's election, which I think is going to be a huge catalyst, not only for adoption, but for education. I also saw Netflix has a big Bitcoin documentary coming out later this month, Anthony. So I do feel like we're getting close to the point where liquidity has been sucked out of the system. Selling is now exhausted, as we talked about in the intro. We've got the onboard ramps or the on-ramps now in place for the general public to invest in Bitcoin through their banks or institutional investments. And it seems, Anthony, that everything is now coming together almost polar opposite to how it felt a few years ago when FTX and the whole rest of the world was crashing around Bitcoin. So I guess the answer to this question for us would be yes, the rally can continue. Maybe it's taking a little bit longer or a few more steps than we would like, Anthony. But overall, I'm still feeling super optimistic about Bitcoin and, of course, the Bitcoin miners, which I feel now are in a supreme position as a lot of the Bitcoin valuation, in my opinion, has been pulled out of these companies, shifted over to HPC. And it feels like at this point now, the Bitcoin mining is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, I think so. We've seen some of those that have moved into the space, how their share prices have benefited from that over the last few weeks. We've seen some big rises. We've seen Soluna, up over 100%. We've seen TeraWulf up 60% in the last month. We've seen Hut 8 have a good ride this year. They were one of the first ones to sort of get into the HPC space. They bought the data centers a few years ago, had a load of GPUs from their Ethereum mining days, so you could see the strategy that they were going to use. Bit Digital, Sam will articulate that, he doesn't feel the market's giving them due credit for what they've achieved there. And maybe will do, in August when they start announcing on a monthly basis that they're getting, between 7 and 8 million in monthly revenues for HPC. Bear in mind, at the moment, Hive Digital and IREN are probably getting about 1 million a month. So around about 10 to 12 million of annualized revenue. And Sam and his company are going to be achieving sort of 7 to 8 times that amount from August onwards. And we've talked about Core Scientific, but their revenues don't come in till either the end of this year or actually probably 2025, and then they really ramp up once the capital payments have been made. But even in those early 2 years, they're still going to be making about 30% net profit after paying the capital out of the revenues. So they'll have a revenue deduction for the capital repayments to be made. They're still going to make 30% profits in the first 2 years. That then goes to close to 80% in year 3, and then from year 4 onwards, it is 80%. And they've still got another 230 megawatts to assign, and we'll probably get more news from that this year. But everything seems to be going well for those companies that do that. But it is a talking point at the moment. The market's like this, Wall Street likes this, and Bitcoin miners, the pure play ones will have their day in the future. I'm sure of it. It's gone from $1 to $70,000 in the space of about 12 years. Who's to say what the next 12 years brings for Bitcoin miners?
That's exactly right. And even the leader of the pack in terms of HPC, Core Scientific, Adam Sullivan, when he was questioned, Anthony, are you going to pivot away from Bitcoin? He said, absolutely not. We are here because of Bitcoin. That's the same message we've heard from Jason at Riot, same message from Matt Schultz at CleanSpark, same message from most of the CEOs we talked to, really saying Bitcoin is where it all started. Bitcoin is why we're here. And these other forms of revenue generation are really just additional business units that they can fold in as complementary to the underlying Bitcoin mining. And again, like you say, Anthony, yes, a lot of those 15 exahash for Core Scientific may be replacing old miners, but that's still a significant investment and really a talking point or stance on the Bitcoin industry itself to make that type of investment at this point in the game. So very interesting to see how this will all play out, you guys. Account has returned into the green now, Anthony. It seems some of the miners are finding their footing, specifically the HPC exposed ones right now. So hopefully you guys are making some money today in the green. Let us know in the comment section your thoughts on the price of Bitcoin here, if the selling pressure has finally finished, or if we're going to continue to see some sideways trading. If you're still watching the video at this point, hopefully you found some value. Make sure you hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, we're trying to get to 45,000 before Nashville. You guys, we're well on our way. Feel free to join. We'd love to have you as part of the community. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.